The veil rested against her face like a fragile curtain, delicate lace disguising the storm she carried within. To the watching crowd, she was a vision of serenity, a bride glowing with promise and devotion. But beneath the satin and the pearls, years of unspoken cruelty lay buried like glass shards beneath her skin. The altar was not merely a beginning, it was a battlefield, carefully chosen, perfectly staged. She had waited for this moment, groomed her silence into a weapon, and no one, not even the man who had scarred her soul, sensed the reckoning laced into every step she took down the aisle. Her father leaned in as he adjusted her veil, his whisper brushing against her ear, sharp as the edge of a knife. "Don't think a new dress erases what you will always be," he muttered, cruel amusement dripping from his tongue. His words, so quiet that no guest could hear, pierced deeper than any vow spoken that day. But unlike the girl she once was, she did not flinch. She let the words settle, like a poisonous echo swallowed whole, and returned her gaze to the man waiting for her at the altar. If her father had meant to wound her, he had only sharpened her resolve. The memories rose unbidden, heavy as chains. The laughter of strangers when her father paraded her shame years ago. The sting of his insults, public and private. The hollow ache of never being enough for the man who should have protected her. And yet, standing there in white silk, she did not tremble. The weight of those silent wounds pressed upon her, but instead of breaking her, they steadied her. Her composure was not fragile, it was armor forged in humiliation, polished by restraint, and now gleaming under the glow of church candles. The guests smiled, oblivious. They saw only what she allowed them to see. A radiant bride, cheeks flushed, with the glow of love, hands folded in reverence. None suspected the storm she cradled inside. None could guess that every gentle nod, every demure glance, was calculated, rehearsed, perfected. Even the groom, who adored her without suspicion, believed in her gentleness. The world believed in her innocence. Only she knew the truth that the ceremony was not about love alone, but about justice long overdue. This marriage was not merely a vow, it was leverage, a shield crafted from rings and signatures. Her father thought he had control still, thought his voice lingered louder than any new beginning she could claim. But he had underestimated her silence, misread her stillness. What he mistook for submission was a strategy. What he believed was forgiveness was a sharpened blade hidden beneath silk gloves. The battlefield was set, and he had already walked into it blind. Her smile was flawless, but it was a mask. Each curve of her lips concealed years of pain refined into patience. She had worn that mask since childhood, learning to bow her head, while her mind raced ahead, recording, remembering, building. The rage she carried was not wild, it was disciplined, tempered, and waiting for release. She did not need to raise her voice to be powerful. She needed only to wait for the moment where silence itself would shatter him. When she spoke her vows, her voice was soft, steady, and deceptively tender. She promised devotion, loyalty, and love, but the words were laced with another vow, one meant for ears that did not deserve to hear it. Her father shifted in his seat, arms crossed, smug in his belief that she would always remain under his shadow. He did not know her words were not only for the groom but also a blade aimed at him, hidden within the sweetness of ceremony. The hush of the church deepened as her vows ended. And then she lifted her eyes not to her husband, but to the man who had whispered cruelty into her childhood, who thought he still owned her silence. Her voice, though soft, carried weight like thunder wrapped in velvet. She did not need to raise it. She only needed to let it be heard. The silence fractured as her words became the first cut, clean and deliberate, a promise of reckoning he could not stop. The ceremony that should have marked her submission had become the stage of his undoing, and as the final vow left her lips, she knew the war he had waged against her was ending not in noise, but in silence sharp enough to draw blood. The smile she wore was flawless, a careful masterpiece honed over years of quiet endurance. Every insult, every wound carved into her by the man who should have been her protector, had taught her the art of masking pain with elegance. To those watching, She was the very image of grace, a bride radiant in white, carrying the promise of a future filled with love. Yet beneath that calm exterior, her heart pulsed with a steady, deliberate rhythm, each beat sharpening the resolve she had carried in silence for so long. At her side stood a groom who adored her wholly. His gaze lingered on her with tenderness, his hands warm with trust. He saw only the woman he cherished, blind to the storm curling inside her chest. To him, this day was the pinnacle of their love story, a celebration untainted by shadows. He could not imagine the weight she carried, nor the dangerous theater that her father's presence turned this ceremony into. His innocence was both a comfort and a shield, for though he did not know the full truth, his unwavering belief in her strength steadied her every step. Her father, however, played his role with perfection. The respected patriarch, admired by friends and neighbors, lauded for his discipline and charm. To the world, he was a man of principle. But she alone knew the truth behind the mask, the cruelty that twisted his smile, the venom hidden in his words, the monster lurking behind the facade of respectability. Every clap on the back he received, every nod of admiration from the guests, was another layer of his carefully constructed illusion. But illusions, she knew, were fragile things. Her mother sat quietly among the guests, her expression unreadable, her silence the sharpest blade her father had ever wielded. It was her compliance, her unspoken obedience, that had strengthened his reign of terror. For years, the mother had looked away, choosing peace over protection, silence over confrontation. That silence had taught the daughter early that she could rely on no one, that her voice, her will, would be the only weapon she could ever trust. The guests filled the hall with admiration, their whispers circling like smoke. They praised the family, admired the father's accomplishments, envied the perfection of the day. Not one of them could see the rot beneath, the cracks sealed with charm and lies. To them, he was untouchable, his power absolute. They did not know they were witnessing not his triumph but the stage of his ruin. Beneath his charm lay scandals buried deep, hidden by intimidation and control. Whispers of affairs, betrayals, and debts lingered at the edges of conversations over the years, quickly smothered whenever they surfaced. He had maintained his grip through fear, through wealth, through a cultivated image that left no room for doubt. But his daughter had not only heard the whispers, she had remembered them. She had collected every rumor, every trace of his corruption, storing them like kindling waiting for a spark. And still, her most enduring wound was not the whispered rumors but the day he had stripped her of dignity before those she loved most. The memory burned even now, the laughter, the humiliation, the way his words had made her small and powerless. That day had forged her silence into steel. It was the wound that never healed, the scar she carried into every decision she made. His control had not been limited to words. He had tightened his grip on her life with money, ensuring she could not escape without his shadow looming. He had bound her future to his wealth, leaving her no space to breathe freely. Yet she had learned to live within the chains, waiting patiently until the moment came when she could turn them into shackles for him instead. Her groom's trust was the one light untainted by shadows. Though he could not see the full depth of her scars, he believed in her strength. His love asked no questions, demanded no explanations. He accepted the silence she sometimes carried and mistook it for gentleness rather than strategy. It was his faith, blind though it was, that gave her courage. He believed she was unbreakable, and so she became exactly that. Her stillness at the altar was not weakness, but preparation. She had learned that silence was sharper than any scream. For years she had sharpened her blade in the dark, biding her time, perfecting the patience that would one day bring her freedom. Today, beneath the weight of lace and vows, the resolve was steady as stone. The day had been orchestrated as her father's triumph, a moment where he could bask in the admiration of others, watching his daughter's future unfold under his shadow. But what he believed to be his crowning glory was already unraveling. The celebration was not his, though he did not yet know it. It was hers, And within the laughter and applause, the foundations of his empire of lies would begin to crumble. By the time the last toast was made, he would realize that the daughter he had broken in childhood had been rebuilding herself for this very day, not as his victim, but as the author of his downfall. It began with the discovery of a box long forgotten, tucked beneath the dust of years in a corner her father never thought she would look. Inside were journals, letters, and ledgers, the kind of paper trail only arrogance could leave behind. At first, she touched them with trembling hands, afraid of what she might uncover. But as she read, fear gave way to clarity. Each page was a confession he had never meant to write. Every entry revealed not just mistakes, but deliberate sins, choices that betrayed family, loyalty, and truth. The silence of her youth now had words, proof etched in ink that her father was not the man the world adored, but the monster she had always known. Piece by piece, the threads of betrayal unraveled before her. Affairs carefully hidden, embezzlement woven into charitable accounts, deceit crafted so neatly it seemed almost artful. He had built his reputation on the suffering of others, disguising theft as generosity and corruption as power. He had believed he was untouchable, that secrets buried beneath wealth and intimidation could never surface. Yet, in her hands, those threads began to twist together, forming a rope strong enough to drag him down. His arrogance fed her resolve. Around others, he boasted freely, bragging of his influence, his spotless name, his untouchable empire. He laughed at rivals who dared question him, dismissed whispers that might tarnish his reputation. He stood tall in the light, blind to the storm building quietly in the shadows. And always, he underestimated the one person closest to him, the daughter who had learned to wear silence like a second skin. To him, she was nothing more than obedience in human form, the child molded by fear, still trapped beneath his control. He never looked close enough to see the fire smoldering behind her calm eyes, the quiet rebellion growing stronger each day. His mistake was believing her silence meant surrender, when in truth it meant preparation. Months passed as she gathered her arsenal. She worked in the shadows, each document tucked away, each recording secured, each witness persuaded to speak when the time was right. Every night she studied his empire, charting its weaknesses, mapping the cracks he could not see. What he thought was her distance was her discipline. What he believed to be passivity was her sharpening her blade, not of steel, but of truth. When the day of her wedding arrived, she cloaked her vengeance in tradition. The vows she wrote sounded like promises of devotion, but every word carried the weight of justice. They were not crafted for her groom's ears alone, but for the man sitting smugly in the front row, convinced that this ceremony was his final claim of victory. To him, it was proof that his daughter was bound forever by the legacy he had shaped. To her, it was the stage for his undoing. His lectures echoed in her memory, those endless reminders about family image, the weight of reputation, the need for control. He had believed his words would shape her into his reflection, but instead, they became the very fuel for her rebellion. Each command, each condescending remark, had forged her into something far stronger than he imagined. She had learned from his cruelty not how to submit, but how to rise. As the celebration unfolded, he paraded her as if she were a trophy. Every toast was his triumph, every smile from the guests a testament to the image he had so carefully built. He did not know that beneath the lace and laughter, she carried the proof that would dismantle everything he held dear. What he flaunted as his victory was already written as his ruin. Her silence was her shield. She let him gloat, let him bask in the illusion of control. She gave him no reason to doubt, no sign of defiance, only the stillness of a woman waiting. But within that stillness lay strength he could never crush, a weapon he would never see until it was too late. The countdown to reckoning had already begun. Each day that passed tightened the noose, every detail of her plan falling into place with precision. She did not rush. She let the weight build, let him dig his own grave deeper with arrogance and pride. Timing was everything, and she would strike not when he was ready, but when he was blind. And when the vows echoed in the quiet of the ceremony, the words that should have bound her became the words that broke him. For woven into those promises were truths he could not silence, revelations disguised as devotion. What he believed to be tradition was the final act of rebellion. As the applause faded and the celebration continued, his empire began to crack not with shouts, but with the steady, unstoppable force of justice written in silence and delivered in vows. The church glowed with extravagance, every polished surface and gilded ornament shimmering beneath the gaze of hundreds. To the guests, it was the picture of triumph, the daughter of a powerful man stepping into a life of security, her wedding day draped in grandeur. Yet behind her veil, the bride felt none of the awe that rippled through the pews. She saw instead a stage perfectly set, perfectly timed, the moment she had been waiting for. While the crowd marveled at love and legacy, she knew the truth. This was no celebration. It was the arena where reckoning would finally begin. Her father leaned close as he adjusted her veil one last time, his breath carrying the cruel words meant to remind her who still held power. "Don't think this dress makes you more than you are," he whispered, voice dripping with disdain. The sting of his insult might have broken her once, but now it only confirmed what she already knew. He thought her powerless. He thought the day belonged to him. He had no idea she had been building this moment, crafting it piece by piece until his arrogance became the very rope that would strangle him. And arrogant he was, strutting through the day as though the world itself bent to his will. He soaked in the admiration, lifted his chin higher with every compliment, convinced that his daughter's marriage was his crowning achievement. Every glance he cast, every word he spoke, was rooted in pride so thick it blinded him. He believed he was untouchable, that his reputation was carved in stone. He didn't realize that stone was already cracking beneath his feet. The guests played their part well, an audience drunk on his charm. They laughed at his anecdotes, praised his accomplishments, and whispered admiration at his polished control. To them, he was the perfect patriarch, a man whose success extended even into the glow of his daughter's wedding. None of them could see what the bride saw behind the practiced smile lay a man whose empire was built on cruelty, deceit, and the kind of rot that could not stay hidden forever. She stood beside her groom with the same serenity she had perfected over years of endurance. To anyone watching, her calm was the quiet joy of a bride lost in love. In truth, it was certainty. The day was not his victory, nor was it his legacy. It was hers the moment her silence transformed into power, her pain into justice. Every smile she offered was measured, every breath steady. She did not tremble, because she already knew how the story would end. Her father, however, continued to bask as though the moment belonged only to him. His every gesture screamed of control, shaking hands with guests, straightening his suit, placing himself at the center of attention. He believed the family image had been preserved, the reputation cemented, the daughter obedient. He mistook her composure for compliance, never realizing it was the stillness of a predator waiting for the strike. She felt the weight of every admiring glance directed at her father, each one a painful reminder of the lies he had spun so well. They saw a man of dignity, of power, of honor. Soon, those illusions would splinter like glass underfoot. Every compliment he absorbed would sour, every ounce of admiration would curdle into scorn. And she would not need to shout or rage to make it happen. The truth itself would be the hammer. The officiant's voice broke through the air, inviting her to speak. The moment hung heavy, the hush of the church deepening as all eyes turned to the bride. She felt the weight of their expectation, the belief that her vows would be the sweet promises of devotion. But within her chest, the words coiled like a hidden blade, sharpened through months of preparation, ready to cut through the facade her father wore like armor. The silence before she began stretched, charged with tension only she could feel. She drew in a breath, not of nerves but of anticipation. This was not the trembling pause of a bride overwhelmed, it was the measured inhale of a strategist at the edge of victory. Every heartbeat drummed with the certainty that when she spoke, everything would change. Her father leaned back in his seat, smug, already savoring the pride he would claim from her vows. He believed the words were meant for her husband, promises of love and loyalty that would tie her life neatly into the path he had carved. He did not know that each phrase was a trial in disguise, each sentence carrying truths he could not silence. By the time her vows ended, his empire would not be a fortress, but a ruin. He would not see the end coming until it was upon him, delivered not with screams, but with calm, deliberate words that cut deeper than any blade. Her voice began softly, each word measured and gentle, the kind that drew listeners in and eased their hearts. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, lulled by the cadence of her vows, expecting the familiar warmth of love and devotion. She spoke of promises and dreams, of journeys they would share, weaving tenderness into every syllable. No one suspected the undercurrent beneath the sweetness, the sharp edge hidden in the rhythm of her sentences. This was her quiet opening, the soft beginning before the storm, a lull before the reckoning that had been years in preparation. As the words flowed, subtle threads of meaning wove between them, invisible to all but those who knew to look. "We wear our masks not always by choice," she murmured, each syllable carefully crafted, "and sometimes the smiles we offer conceal the deepest scars." Whispers of betrayal and hidden truths slipped like shadows into her speech, clothed in poetic grace that seemed innocuous to her audience. Only those attuned to nuance, the groom, the attentive few, could sense the tension curling beneath the gentle tones. The seeds of unease were planted quietly, a prelude to the unraveling that would follow. Gradually, her voice shifted. Where once there had been softness, now there was clarity, sharp and unyielding. Devotion transformed into revelation, each phrase carefully measured to expose, each pause calculated to build suspense. The words no longer comforted. They probed, they questioned, they demanded attention. The audience felt it subtly at first, a flicker of unease, before realizing that the narrative they had assumed was being rewritten in real time. Every syllable had weight, every phrase a small hammer striking at the edifice of pride her father had built. Then, the masks began to fall. She spoke directly now, naming the man of image and power, the patriarch whose polished exterior had wrought and cruelty. The halls echoed with the unflinching truth of her voice as she stripped away the layers of charm and respectability he had relied upon for decades. Pride became impotence. Control dissolved into shock. His carefully curated persona, the one that had commanded respect and admiration, now lay bare for all to scrutinize, fragile and fractured beneath the weight of revelation. The sins he had buried in shadow spilled into the open. She recited the betrayals he had thought hidden, the affairs, the deceit, the financial manipulations, each accusation wrapped in the form of vows yet carrying the unmistakable sting of justice. The words struck with the precision of someone who had observed, waited, and prepared for this singular moment. Every lie he had counted on remained unseen until now, each secret a dagger revealed in public for the first time. Gasps and murmurs swept through the congregation. Shock battled disbelief as the guests struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the one revealed by her words. Whispers surged like a rising tide, each ripple carrying astonishment and horror. Eyes darted, glances met, and the illusion of certainty began to crumble as the crowd absorbed the undeniable truth she delivered with quiet authority. He rose, a reflex born of arrogance, intending to silence her with his presence, his voice, his authority. But the power he believed he held was hollow. Each attempt to command attention faltered against her unwavering tone. Each gesture of control dissolved beneath the precision of her delivery. His composure cracked like thin ice underfoot, leaving only vulnerability where he had once assumed dominance. She did not falter. Her voice remained steady, calm, and deliberate, a blade honed over years of silent endurance. Every syllable reinforced the truths she had unearthed, and every pause allowed them to resonate. There was no tremor, no hesitation, only the meticulous, execution of a plan that had taken months to perfect. In her unwavering delivery lay the weight of justice, crushing the defenses he had long considered unassailable. The groom, at her side, watched in stunned silence, the realization dawning that the woman beside him had not simply endured but had orchestrated a reckoning in plain sight. The truth of her strategic mind, of her meticulous patience, revealed itself in the elegance and precision of her words. He understood then that love and loyalty were not the only vows being fulfilled. Justice and retribution walked hand in hand with them. And finally, she ended. Her last words were not promises of affection, not the soft closure of a marriage ceremony, but the undeniable truth that would follow him forever. Each revelation she had delivered crystallized into a final blow, leaving him stripped of pretense, powerless, and exposed before everyone who had once revered him. In the silence that followed, only her composed presence remained, the architect of a downfall so complete it required no gloating, no malice, only the undeniable force of a carefully executed truth. The moment lingered, heavy with consequence, and then shifted into a stillness that marked the end of his dominion. The woman beside him, the bride who had begun with softness, now stood unshaken, triumphant not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who had waited for the perfect moment and struck with inevitability. Justice, rendered with patience, and intellect had found its mark, and there was no undoing what had been spoken aloud in vows disguised as devotion. The murmurs began almost imperceptibly, like a low current moving through the crowd, until glances sharpened and whispers gained. Wait! Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging uncertain looks as fragments of realization spread quietly, gathering momentum. The polished mask of authority the father had worn for decades cracked under the weight of her words, and the truth he had, buried with meticulous care, now fluttered freely in the air. Each guest, from distant relatives to close friends, felt the sting of recognition. The man they had admired was not as they believed. Conversations that had once praised his judgment and celebrated his acumen faltered. Business partners exchanged discreet, questioning nods. Confidence whispered behind hands cupped like shields. Where confidence had once been absolute, hesitation now lingered. The father's reputation, long considered unassailable, showed its first vulnerable seams. Every smirk he had offered, every story he had curated, now hung in doubt. Those who had once leaned on his authority began to reconsider, not wanting to be associated with the unraveling figure before them. The man himself seemed frozen, an echo of power rendered powerless. He opened his mouth, perhaps to assert dominance, to silence the murmurs that grew steadily louder, but the words caught somewhere between arrogance and disbelief. The command he had wielded effortlessly for years had lost its potency. Every attempt at intimidation bounced off invisible walls, leaving only the stark reality. He had nothing left to control. His stature, once commanding, now felt diminished, dwarfed by the precision of her justice and the silent support it drew from those around her. Through it all, she moved with unshakable calm, her hand resting lightly in her husband's, each step measured and deliberate. There was no need for shouted accusations, no need for theatrics. Her composure carried more weight than any confrontation could have. In every gentle smile and measured movement, she projected a quiet certainty that echoed louder than the chaos surrounding them. With each forward step, the contrast between her grace and his crumbling presence underscored the depth of his defeat. The downfall unfolded relentlessly, public and total. Friends who had once sought his approval now whispered of caution and distrust, and business associates who had depended on his judgment hesitated to commit to his plans. Each observer, bearing witness to the spectacle, absorbed the irreversible nature of his undoing. There was no recovery, no behind closed doors reprieve. The exposure was complete, his influence extinguished in the same spaces that had once amplified it. Justice arrived with poetic inevitability, carved into the very truth he had spent a lifetime shaping to his advantage. The family whose image he had weaponized, whose compliance he had taken for granted, now became the instrument of his collapse. The irony was sharp. The very household he had sought to impress, to control, was the one delivering the final verdict he could neither contest nor escape. Every carefully constructed illusion dissolved, leaving nothing but the cold clarity of consequence. Her voice, steady and deliberate on that day, resonated far beyond the ceremonial vows. Each word she had chosen, each subtle turn of phrase, became an enduring instrument of reckoning. Where he had relied on dominance and fear, she relied on strategy and patience, and the impact of her speech lingered longer than any argument or confrontation ever could. In that moment, her singular voice held more authority than the power he had once wielded without question, proving that the precision of intellect surpasses the force of arrogance, and in the quiet reflection that followed, her own words crystallized. In memory and truth, he taught me silence was survival, but on my wedding day, my voice became his ruin. Every syllable carried the weight of years endured, the precision of long-held observation, and the undeniable satisfaction of justice executed flawlessly. In that silence transformed, she claimed victory not with spectacle, but with the quiet authority of a voice that could no longer be ignored.